All right. We're in Genesis chapter 37. I think that we're picking up at 25. Is that correct? We did all the readings up through there. Also, I think keep in mind that chapters 37 and 40 occurred while Isaac was still alive, even though we read about his death in chapter 35. So these three chapters, he's still alive. Kim is
It's
going
37 through 40.
37 through 40, chapters
Through 40.
37 through 40. Um, Kim is just listening in, so I will go ahead, and Amber's not on, so I will go ahead and read 25, chapter 37, 25 through the end of 37. Then they sat down to eat, and looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites, Ishmael's people, coming from Gilead with their camels bearing gum, balm, and myrrh on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers listened to him. The Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. They took Joseph to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not in the pit, he tore his clothes and returned to his brothers and said, "The boy is gone, and where shall I go?" And then they took Joseph's robe and slaughtered a goat and dipped the robe in blood. And they sent the robe of many colors and brought it to their father and said, "This we found. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not." And he identified it and said, "It is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, "No, I shall go down to Sheol to my son, mourning." Thus his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. Any thoughts?
My question is, if they had put blood on that coat and if they presumed that he was torn to pieces, why wasn't the coat torn?
Yeah, that would make sense, wouldn't it? Also, like, let's remember what that coat represented. When he gave that to him when he was 17, he was saying, "This is going to be the firstborn of our family, and he's going to get the double portion." The coat, I had never realized that before, that that's what that coat represented. So Reuben kept them from killing him in the first place, and then Judah's the one that decided to sell him.
Makes me wonder too, if Reuben was there, would that have happened? Because he came after the fact.
Yeah, and out of all of them, he should have been the one that wanted to kill him because Reuben was actually the firstborn. He should have wanted to get rid of him. All right, Cindy, whenever you're ready.
Okay, verse 25. Ishmaelites, a people group also known as Midianites, the descendants of Ishmael and of Abraham through Keturah and Midian, were sufficiently intermarried or were such inveterate travelers and traders that they were viewed as synonymous groups. These were coming west from Gilead. Verse 27. This criminal behavior would later be prohibited by the Mosaic legislation. And that legislation is in Exodus 21:16 and Deuteronomy 4:7. 28. 20 shekels of silver. This
Can
was
you
the
repeat
average
that?
price of a slave at that time in the second millennium BC.
Did someone have a question?
Yeah, the legislation, what was that? What was the references?
Exodus 21:16,
Okay,
Deuteronomy 24:7.
okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And then can you repeat what you said about the 20 shekels?
Yes. This was the average price of a slave at that time in the second millennium BC. Although most slaves were part of the booty of military conquest, private and commercial slave trading was also common. Joseph was sold into slavery 1897 BC.
Oh, 1897 BC. That's interesting that they have it to an exact date. Is there any references for that?
No.
Okay.
Verse 29, Reuben tore his clothes. Although he was absent at the time of the sale, he would be held responsible for the treachery and so joined in the cover-up. His grief manifested how much he had actually wanted to save Joseph. 31-35. The deceiver of Isaac was deceived by his own son's lie. Sin's punishment is often long delayed. Verse 35, grave. This is the first Old Testament use of this term for the abode of the dead. It is used to refer to an earthly burial plot. It is a general Hebrew term meaning the place of the dead. Sheol, Sheol, is used 65 times in the Old Testament, referring either to the body in its decaying form or to the soul in its conscious afterlife.
So it's the body in its decaying form or the soul in its afterlife.
Yes. Verse 36, Potiphar. He was a prominent court official and high-ranking officer in Egypt, perhaps captain of the royal bodyguard. His name, a most unusual grammatical form for that period, either meant the one whom the god Ra has given, or the one who is placed on earth by Ra, making it a descriptive epithet more than a personal name. And that's it for 37.
What did it say was done by Ra?
The one whom the god Ra has given.
What is that? What was that attached to though?
His name?
For Joseph.
No, Potiphar.
Oh, Potiphar. Okay. The one who Ra has given.
The one whom the god Ra has given, or the one who is placed on earth by Ra. And Ra is R-A, Egyptian god. I know that from my crosswords.
Thank you. Any thoughts before Kathy starts reading?
Okay, this covers 23 through 28. Indifference. It must have given them great pleasure to strip Joseph of his special robe and then drop him into the empty cistern. Cisterns were usually quite deep and had long, narrow openings that would be too high for a prisoner to reach. In order to get out, you'd need somebody to lower a rope and pull you up. It's difficult to understand how the men could sit down and calmly eat a meal while their brother was suffering and begging them to set him free. However, hearts that have been hardened by hatred and poisoned by thoughts of murder aren't likely to pay much attention to the cries of their victim. But then think of what our Lord's own nation did to him. All of us are potentially capable of doing what Joseph's brother did, for the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? Jeremiah 17:9. Just then the men spied a Midianite. And it says the words Ishmaelite and Midianite were used interchangeably. Merchants were called Ishmaelites because many Ishmaelites were engaged in trading. Okay, the men spied a Midianite merchant train moving across the plain, and this gave Judah an idea. They could sell their brother as a slave and at the same time get rid of him and make some money. Since anybody taken to Egypt and sold for slave wasn't likely to win his freedom and come back again, there was no danger that their plot would ever be discovered. They forgot that God was watching and was still in control. Jacob had inherited the covenant blessings, and this made him a very special person in the eyes of God. The Lord had his divine purposes to fulfill, and there is no wisdom or understanding or counsel against the Lord. Proverbs 21:30. Starting with Cain's murder of Abel, man's inhumanity to the man is painfully recorded in both biblical and secular history. We're made in the image of God and we belong to the same human family, and yet we can't seem to get along with one another. Everything from family feuds over lottery winnings to civil wars blamed on ancient injuries gives evidence that the world desperately needs a savior who can make our hearts new. Deception, verses 29 through 36. Reuben was absent when his brothers sold Joseph, perhaps taking care of some problem with the sheep. Maybe he absented himself deliberately so they wouldn't suspect his hidden plan. When he visited the cistern, he was shocked to find that Joseph was gone. Thus he hurried back to the camp to find out what had happened. Certainly his attitude and actions made it clear to his brothers that his sympathies were with Joseph, for he tore his clothes like a man in mourning. He who covers his sins will not prosper. Proverbs 28:13. Is God's unchanging law, but people still think they can defy it and escape the consequences. Among Jacob's sons, one sin led to another, as the men fabricated the evidence that would deceive their father into thinking Joseph was dead, killed by a wild beast. Jacob would have no problem identifying a special robe, and he would have no way to test the blood. As tragic and treacherous as this deception was, Jacob was reaping what he himself had sown. Years before, he had killed a kid in order to deceive his father, and now his own sons were following in his footsteps. H.C. Leopold has translated chapter 37, verse 32, and they sent the long-sleeved cloak, and it brought to their father, and had it brought to their father.
Can you back up just a minute? It said years ago, Jacob had killed a what?
A goat.
Oh, okay.
Remember whenever he put the fur on he
Oh,
shed
okay.
blood. He shed blood. He shed light.
Okay.
I think it's interesting too, because I thought, yesterday, Reuben's being so nice by wanting to save, because he was like thinking they'd put him in the pit and then he would later go back and get him out of the pit and return him to his dad. But then I realized over today's reading, it wasn't that. It was because he was the one that was going to be held responsible for Jacob not coming home, or Joseph not coming home.
Yeah, my concordant, the boy is gone. What will I do now? In verse 30, it says that he was concerned about what's going to happen to him because Joseph is gone. He wasn't concerned about Joseph.
There I
He was
was giving him
concerned.
credit.
Yeah. Unwilling to confront their father personally, the brothers sent a servant to Jacob to show him the evidence and tell him the lie that they had concocted. This was a brutal way to treat their father, but the tender mercies of the wicked are cruel. Proverbs 12:10. Trying to jump to conclusions, Jacob accepted the evidence, believed the story, and concluded that Joseph indeed was dead. He went into deep mourning and 20 years later was still grieving over the death of Joseph. His family tried to comfort him, but to no avail. His favorite son was dead, and Jacob would carry his grief with him to the grave. Years later, Jacob would lament, "All these things are against me," when actually all these things were working for him. This doesn't mean that God approved of or engineered the brothers' hatred and deception, or that they weren't responsible for what they did. It does mean that our God is so great that he can work out his purposes even when people are doing their worst. The greatest example of this is Calvary. Years later, Joseph would say, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." God, God providentially brought Joseph safely to Egypt and saw to it that he was sold to one of Pharaoh's chief officers. Potiphar is called captain of the guard, which suggests he was the head of Pharaoh's personal bodyguard and in charge of official executions. But the important thing wasn't that Joseph was connected with such a powerful man in Egypt. The important thing was that the Lord was with Joseph and he prospered. The workings of God's providence are indeed awesome, and this ought to be a great source of encouragement to us in the difficult circumstances of life. He does as he pleases with the powers of heaven and the peoples of earth. No one can hold back his hand or say to him, "What have you done?" Daniel 4:35. Jacob and Joseph never read Romans 8:28, but they experienced the truth of it and saw what the hand of God can do. If the promises worked for them, they will work for us today, for God and his word have not changed. The end.
I think it's interesting too that Judah's mom is Leah, and the line of Jesus comes through Judah. And here he is,
Judah's the one that sold him.
and Judah's the one that sold him. Any other
I have a question. When Joseph betrayed Jesus, or Judas, how many shekels did he get?
30?
30. Okay.
Yeah,
Thank
I was
you.
thinking about that too because I thought, well, that's less than Jesus, but this was 2,000 years before Jesus too. So,
Inflation.
cost of living, inflation. Yeah. And at that point, I think 30 was like a slave that had been gored by a boar, and it wasn't the average. It would have been like a low end slave. All right. 37, 25 through 28. Joseph's fortunes had changed in a moment. He was living large like royalty until his brothers sold him for 20 pieces of silver to traveling Ishmaelites. Just like that, he became a slave. Little did he know that God was orchestrating something much bigger than he could imagine. Reuben, verse 29, it seems, wasn't with the brothers when they sold Joseph into slavery. So when he returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes in despair. He had managed to save Joseph's life, but he could not protect him completely. See, I feel like he reads like poor Reuben. 30 and 30 through 32. Together, Joseph's older brothers decided to cover up their evil actions with deceit. They took Joseph's robe, slaughtered a male goat, dipped the robe into its blood. Then they presented the robe to their father Jacob. There is a certain level of irony here since Jacob had used goat skins to deceive his brother years before. Now Jacob is deceived by animal evidence. Jacob's deceptive character had been transferred to his sons. 33 through 35. Recognizing Joseph's robe, Jacob assumed that Joseph had been killed, and he mourned for his son many days. He even refused to be comforted by his other children when they tried to cheer him, showing that Jacob's depression affected the entire family. And then verse 36. Just when God surely seemed absent from the perspective of Joseph and Jacob, we get a hint that he was up to something in the middle of this family disaster. God, we will soon discover, intended to bring Jacob and his sons to Egypt in order to protect them from a coming famine. And Joseph's recent departure placed him in Egypt, in the house of Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, in preparation for that time. God was setting the stage to bring about Joseph's destiny, even when no human was aware of it. The end. Any other commentaries, thoughts, questions? Nope. All right, then we'll move on to chapter 38, Judah and Tamar. I don't have any breaks. Do you guys? We could look at Worsby. Where does he take his break?
It looks to me like he does the whole thing.
How long is it?
It's not quite a page.
Oh, I'm surprised he's not more long-winded on this one.
Wait, let me check the next page in case he did
A double?
yeah. Nope, it looks like it's just that part of a page.
Well, we may just have to carry it over to tomorrow. We'll move on to chapter 38. The drama continues. It happened
Chrissy,
at that.
do you want me to read? I was going to say, do you want me to read since you have to read the commentary?
If you would like to, that would be great.
As long as my microphone's not causing too much static.
It sounds okay right now. There's a little white noise, but it's not bad.
Okay. All right, chapter 28 heading says Judah and Tamar. At that time, Judah left his brothers and went down to stay with a man at Adullam named Hira. There, Judah met the daughter of a Canaanite man named Shua. He married her and lay with her. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son who was named She conceived again and gave birth to a son and named him Onan. She gave birth to still another son and named him Shelah. It was at Kezib that she gave birth to him. Judah got a wife for Ur, his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death. Then Judah said to Onan, lie with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law to produce offspring for your brother. But Onan knew that the offspring would not be his. So whenever he lay with his brother's wife, he spilled his semen on the ground to keep from producing offspring for his brother. What he did was wicked in the Lord's sight, so he put him to death also. Judah then said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, live as a widow in your father's house until my son Selah grows up. For he thought he may die too, just like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's house. After a long time, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. When Judah had recovered from his grief, he went up to Timnah to the men who were shearing his sheep, and his friends Hira, the Adullamite, went with him. When Tamar was told, your father-in-law is on his way to Timnah to shear his sheep, she took off her widow's clothes, covered herself with a veil to disguise herself, and then sat down at the entrance of Nam, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that though Shelah had now grown, she had not been given to him as his wife. Then Judah saw her. He thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. Not realizing that she was his daughter-in-law, she went over to her by the roadside and said, Come now, let me sleep with you. And what will you give me to sleep with you? She asked. I will send you a young goat from my flock, he said. Will you give me something as a pledge until you send it? She asked. He said, what pledge should I give you? Your seal and its cord and the staff in your hand, she answered. So he gave them to her, slept with her, and she became pregnant by him. After she left, she took off her veil and put on her widow's clothes again. Meanwhile, Judah sent the young goat by his friend the Adullamite in order to get his pledge back from the woman, but he did not find her. He asked the men who lived there, where is the shrine prostitute who was beside the road at Enam? There hasn't been any shrine prostitute here, they said. So we went back to Judah and said, I didn't find her. Besides, the men who lived there said there hasn't been any shrine prostitute here. Then Judah said, let her keep what she has, or she will become a laughingstock. After all, I did send her this young goat, but you didn't find her. About 3 months later, Judah was told, your daughter-in-law Tamar is guilty of prostitution, and as a result, she is now pregnant. Judah said, bring her out and have her burned to death. As she was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law. I am pregnant by the man who owns these, she said, and she added, see if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are. Judah recognized them. She is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her my son Shelah. And he did not sleep with her again. When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. As she was giving birth, one of them pulled out his hand. So the midwife took a scarlet thread, tied it on his wrist, and said, this one came out first. But when he drew back his hand, the brother came out, and she said, so this is how you've broken out. And she named him Perez. Then his brother, who had the scarlet thread on his wrist, came out, and he was given the name Zerah.
Here we are with twins again.
The soap opera continues. Jeez.
I think, isn't Tamar's in the line of Jesus, isn't she? Through Judah. So like this is like the most awful situation, but yet here God redeems it.
And these twins never come out normal. This
No,
one,
he's fighting for power.
one came out first and then he got sucked back in, and the other one came out a roaring.
I was interesting too, because when we were over in Turkey, I think it was the Church of Korah. I think there's a lot of like old frescoes and artwork that were there. But one of the things that was really interesting is there is this like pink ribbon that they said they don't know what it means, but it's intertwined in all the artwork and the mosaics. And I'm wondering if it's not the scarlet thread. I might, if I get extra time, look into that because then we have Rahab also who used
Scarlet cord.
scarlet cord. I feel like there's like a connection there that I haven't gotten. Okay, Cindy.
Okay, 38 overview 1 to 30. The Judah interlude, as it is sometimes known, is bracketed by references to the sale of Joseph to Potiphar. Such a parenthesis in the Joseph story demands some reason why a chapter laced with wickedness, immorality, and subterfuge should of necessity be placed in this spot. The answer is that the events recorded are chronologically in the right place, being contemporary with the time of Joseph's slavery in Egypt. The account is also genealogically in the right place, that is, with Joseph gone, seemingly for good, with Reuben, Simeon, and Levi out of favor for incest and for treachery. Judah would most likely accede to the firstborn status. It provides a contrast because it also demonstrates the immoral character of Judah as compared with the virtue of Joseph. Canaanite syncretistic religion and inclusivism threatened to absorb the fourth and later generations of Abraham's heirs. But Egyptian exile and racial exclusivism produced not loss of their ethnic identity, but the preservation of it. Verse 1, Adullamite. Adullam was a town about 1 mile northwest of Hebron. 2-5. Judah's separation from his brethren was marked by more than the geographic. It also involved integration. His Canaanite wife had 3 sons for his family line. Verses 6-10. 2 sons were executed by the Lord, one for unspecified wickedness, and one for deliberate and rebellious rejection of the duty to marry a relative's widow, called a levirate marriage, Levirate. This was a rather dubious distinction for the line of Judah to gain. For details on levirate marriage, according to later Mosaic law, Deuteronomy 25, 5-10. Verse 11. Remain a widow till my son. Taking her father-in-law at his word and residing at her father's household as a widow would do, Tamar vainly waited for Judah's 3rd son to protect the inheritance rights of her deceased husband, and finally resorted to subterfuge to obtain her rights. In so doing, she may have been influenced by Hittite inheritance practices, which called the father-in-law into levirate marriage in the absence of sons to do so. Verse 12, Timnah. The specific location in the hill country of Judah is unknown. Verse 13, shear his sheep. Such an event was frequently associated in the ancient world with festivity and licentious behavior, characteristic of pagan fertility cult practices. 14 and 15. Feeling that no one was going to give her a child, Tamar resorted to disguising herself as a prostitute, obviously knowing she could trap Judah, which says little for his moral stature in her eyes. Judah's Canaanite friend, Hira, called her a shrine prostitute, which made Judah's actions no less excusable just because cultic prostitution was an accepted part of Canaanite culture. He solicited the iniquity by making the proposal to her, and she played the role of a prostitute, negotiating the price. Verse 18, signet and cord and your staff. A prominent man in the ancient Near East endorsed contracts with a cylinder seal he wore on a cord around his neck. Her request for the walking stick suggests it also had sufficient identifying marks on it. Please determine whose these are. The custom of using 3 pieces of identification is attested to in Ugaritic or Canaanite literature. 20 to 23. It was not good for one's reputation to keep asking for the whereabouts of a prostitute. Verse 24, let her be burned. Double standards prevailed in that Judah, no less guilty than Tamar, commanded her execution for immorality. Later, Mosaic legislation would prescribe this form of the death penalty for a priest's daughter who prostituted herself or for those guilty of certain forms of incest. Verse 26, more righteous than I. This was not an accolade for her moral character and faith, but a commendation by Judah for her attention to inheritance rights of her family line and his shameful neglect thereof. Her death sentence was rescinded. Verse 29, Perez. This first of the twins, born of prostitution and incest to Tamar, nevertheless came into the Messianic line, which went through Boaz and Ruth to King David. His name means breach or pushing through. That is an awful lot of sin going on.
Well, I was just thinking, like he went looking for a temple prostitute.
Yeah.
Like that, like why was he participating in pagan behavior?
It was encouraged back then. Remember all that having sex?
Yeah,
under
but in the
priest
Canaanite world, not in his world, men.
Well, he was apparently a bad boy. It says, it may seem strange that prostitution is written about in such as a matter-of-fact way here. Prostitutes were common in pagan cultures, such as Canaan. Public prostitutes served Canaanite goddesses and were common elements of the religious cults. Fornication was encouraged to improve fertility in crops and flocks. Public prostitutes were more highly respected than private prostitutes, who were sometimes punished when they were caught. Tamar was driven to seduce Judah because of her intense desire to have children and be in the matriarch of Judah's line. Judah was driven by his lust. Either case was justified.
Is justified.
Yeah, either case was justified. Neither one of them was a good idea, but
Oh, neither case.
Neither.
Okay. I thought it was saying they were justified.
no, neither.
I think it's interesting too, like once he was busted, then he left her off the hook.
Now, when it says fornication was encouraged to improve fertility in crops and flocks, I guess that was to their gods.
Yeah.
But the public prostitutes were more respected than the private ones. So there.
All these women wanted to do was have babies. Good. Mm.
What's up with that?
Yeah, really.
Well, I mean, she did get she would hit a payday if she had this child.
If you had a baby to the right bloodline, you were taken care of.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Very
it's
much.
interesting too, because I was looking like Judah's sons that survived was just Sheila, which was to his wife, and then these two children to his daughter-in-law.
Well, and I thought it was interesting too, and I don't remember reading this before, but okay, her husband died, so that the next son was supposed to go into her, and then God killed him. So then the next son was supposed to go, which he held back. But apparently it kind of sounded like if there wasn't another son, then the father-in-law was supposed to do that.
Yeah.
To create an heir.
Yeah.
So the commentary at the bottom of mine for that levirate marriage means brother-in-law. And the details of that practice are described in Deuteronomy 25. Where am I at here? Verses 5 and 6. And it says, if brothers are living together and one of them dies without a son, his widow must not marry outside the family. Her husband's brother shall take her and marry her and fulfill the duties of a brother-in-law to her. The first son she bears shall carry on the name of the dead brother, so that his name will not be blotted out from Israel. And then it also refers to the same kind of situation that happened in Ruth when
The Redeemer.
there was no kinsman. Yeah, he was a kinsman redeemer because she didn't have a brother-in-law left. They had all passed away. So that's how he was trying to. He told that one guy that he was supposed to marry her, and the man didn't want to. So that's how Boaz got to marry her.
Rita, what was that Deuteronomy reference? 25?
25, verses 5 and 6. But then it goes on and talks about if the man doesn't want to marry, she goes to the elders, and then the man is brought before the elders. It's pretty involved. But they talk about, if he still says no, they're supposed to spit in his face, and yeah.
Well, I guess
But
once he
these
lays with her,
things-
I'm guessing once he lay with her, then she would become his responsibility.
Mm-hmm. But yet he doesn't take the name of the child. It has to be given to the dead man, the name of the dead man.
I think we'll hold off on Wordby and Tony until tomorrow. Do you guys have any other short commentaries or thoughts that you want to share? I thought it was interesting too that John MacArthur said that Perez was born of prostitution and incest.
So where would the incest have come in? Because of,
The father-in-law, I guess.
yeah,
Well, you're not related.
Because like in Leviticus, it says you're not to sleep with your daughter-in-laws, and you're not supposed, it has like all these sexual things like you're not supposed to do.
It was one of their rules, Kathy.
well, I was going to say, because if there were no sons and the father-in-law was supposed to, yeah, mom said do it anyway, then I don't know how you call that incest if it was like a law. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah, there's a whole section in Leviticus that talks about the sexual sins and who you're not supposed to sleep with. But now we have Reuben, who slept with his husband, his dad's concubine. We got Judah sleeping with his daughter-in-law. There's nothing new under the sun. All right. Well, if you're ready, you guys should know this trivia question today. I expect a wild rush.
Yeah.
Okay. Faith without blank is useless.
Works.
Yeah, or deeds. James 2:20. All right, ladies, this concludes the reading of God's word for today. Until tomorrow.
For sure and for certain.
See you in the morning. Enjoy your beautifully hot day.